Okay, I wrote as most of you know, I write a report called the Morgan Report. It's focused mostly on the macroeconomic picture, the precious metals, and the mining companies. And after the first decade of my work, I was rather pleased with what silver had done, but I thought really what I owe to my readers and myself in a way is, okay, well, what's silver going to do over the next 10 years? So as difficult as this was, I acted as if I didn't know anything about the silver market. I started with a blank piece of paper and asking the question, what is silver and where does it placed on the periodic table? I'm sorry, my sick sense of humor, but I really did start with that premise. And at the end of that study, I wrote the March edition of my report, which I've subsequently put out parts of it onto the internet. As we can see, obviously, we've had quite a run in silver. Silver has very much a characteristic of the spike highs and spike lows, and we are, in my view, at a spike high temporarily. As far as what is the monetary price going to be on silver eventually, you tell me when the Fed's going to quit printing and I'll give you a price. I've said $100, but it's not the price I want you to focus on. It's what's going on behind the scenes, and everybody here has explained that as well as myself. Don't want to belabor the point. I do have a website. I do consultations across the board. I speak around the world. For anybody that's interested in delving into the topic deeply, the site menu here, there's a ton of articles I've written over the last 10 years on the topic that are for free. You can get on the free mailing list. I have to point out for Chris Powell, my GATA poster here, since he's fallen asleep in the front row. It's okay, Chris, it's a long flight, I know. But for anyone that's interested, if I ever do get short on cash, I have number 249, and I figure that that's worth more, not only because I own it, excuse my ego, but since the number 49 appears in it. I was born in San Francisco, and they're famous for the 49 gold rush, so I kind of like having that number. And that's not what I planned on talking about, but let's move on. Okay, silver's use continues to increase. There are so many that I could take hours to go through them all. But medical applications continue to increase, and ridiculous as it sounds, toothbrushes are being embedded with nano silver because it's a natural biocide, and of course you don't have to worry about bacteria in your toothbrush, okay? All kinds of stuff. Wound dressings are huge. Coatings in hospitals. It just goes on and on and on and on. That's just the medical field. Electronics, we're pretty much familiar with all of, many of them. Batteries, clothing. A lot of people don't know that polyester is actually a catalytic process using silver to make polyester. Home appliances, you're seeing this more and more in your high-end washers and your refrigerators, and actually high-end homes are having impregnated silver surfaces in the cooking areas so that you don't really even need a cutting board per se. You can just throw it on your surface and it's got the biocidal properties of silver. Solar power is solar panels primarily, but there's also these concentration mirrors that are used to make electricity the old-fashioned way. You just focus the light on a collector that creates steam, and that pushes a steam turbine, which has been around for decades. Gold or silver? Of course, I get this question quite often, and I'm sure I'll probably get some if I have time today. The answer is yes. Everyone wants to overanalyze things. My friend, Mr. Turk, I think he did it so well, Look, don't think. Look at that chart. What do they look like? They look pretty close to the same darn chart through inflation and deflation. My analogy for where we are, because there are pressures on both sides, but if you took a paper clip, everyone in the UK knows what a paper clip is, right? And you unfold it, and you move it up, and you move it down. Eventually it's going to break, and that's sort of like inflationary pressure, deflationary pressure, inflationary pressure, deflationary. And we're going up and down through this segment of time that I put on here, And they pretty much have tracked each other during those cycles. So, well, inflation is, it's only gold in inflation. No. Well, it's only this in deflation. They're 85% correlated. You should have both. I'm not a silver-only guy. There's a lot of gold concentrics or centric people that gold only. I won't argue with them. I present my case. Supply and demand. Since 1990 through 2006 inclusive, 16 consecutive years, the above-ground silver supply was eaten away by roughly 1.5 billion ounces. I'll round it up to 1.6. No one knows the exact number, which turns out to be 100,000 ounces on an annual basis. Due to the increased commodity boom starting roughly the same time frame, the increased mining activity roughly reached balance around 2006, 2007, depending on which study you look at. I look at both studies, those from GFMS here in the UK, and I also look at the CPM group out of New York, New York. Regardless, both of them agree basically that we hit equilibrium or a slight surplus starting around 2006, 2007. And then we had the financial crisis where the industrial demand for silver fell off sharply, and of course it's rising again quite rapidly. So this delta, or this difference between these two curves, is a deficit, not a shortage. And the way supply and demand meet, and they must meet, supply equals demand always and everywhere, is that the above-ground stockpile, again, was eaten down by about 1.5 billion ounces. So I often get the question, what do you think the price of silver will be this time around at the top? Does anyone know the answer? Because I don't either, right? Do I really know what the total top paper price of silver is going to be? No, I don't. But I know this. It did hit $50 the ounce in 1980 when there were 2 billion ounces of silver above ground, and now there's roughly 500 million to 700 million. I do know this, that two guys from Texas and a few Arabs were buying up a lot of silver, and it went to $50 an ounce. And now, that was a US-only phenomena, counting a little bit of the Middle East. Now it's a worldwide phenomena. Russia wasn't buying silver in those days. They are now. The Chinese didn't know what the silver market was from the banking system. They could go in and buy silver over the counter in China now. It's a worldwide global phenomenon, and people are catching on to the silver story, and yes, it's still early, but it's not a US phenomenon, it's a global one. What's the money supply done since 1980? What's the confidence in the system since 1980? So if we have roughly 25% of the same of silver that we had in 1980, huge increases in the distortions in the global economy, a worldwide market this time around, where do you think the price is going to go? I think it's going higher. Silver mining, okay? Now, when I did this study, I used some work, and I give credit almost always for anyone's work that I use. I just feel that's the only ethical thing to do. You hear some silver commentators / analysts, and they are, well, I said it. Well, I say a lot of things too. They're not always factual, but if they aren't, I try to let you know it's my opinion. Factually speaking, we had this big boom in mining from roughly 2000, and we were actually compounding the rate of silver production by about 2.5%, 3% per year over the last decade. And that helped to make up some of the deficit, as I explained earlier. So that's the production side. And I'm going to come back to this. I just want to show the curve. It's not a good one, but at least you get the idea. So I looked at the mining growth in this 10-year study. And so I made an assumption. And I said, we're going to continue at a 2 to 3% per year, question mark, will we be able to continue over the next decade? And the reason I have the question mark here is that means we have to compound at 3%, which is roughly 20 million ounces a year, year after year after year after year, go 10 years. Now, 20 million ounces may not seem like a lot to you, but it's a lot in the mining world. Pascalama, this is Barrick's big producer, is going to produce roughly 20 million ounces a year. It took a long time to get that mine into full production. So what I'm saying is you have to discover, implement, and mine. In other words, get out of the ground a new Pascalama every year over the next decade just to meet the same amount of mining increase that we saw the last 10 years. And I'm assuming that can be done, but I don't believe it. That's my assumption. So I'm being very conservative. I'm saying that this massive increase in silver mining can continue and continue and continue and continue. So what will that do? Well, that'll give us 800 million versus the 650 that we currently have. But yet we have an increase in demand that exceeds that increase of mining based on those rather favorable assumptions. All right, what about the industrial side? There are so many applications that are coming on board and continue to grow in silver. Again, I don't have time to go into them all. So I took a 100% deflationist point of view on the silver market. I took three things. I took one, food and energy. Silver doesn't really play into the commodity air, but it may. So I looked at food and water and energy as the three most important, because in a deflation you need to eat, you need to drink water, and you need to move. You need to transport goods and services, and we still get around. So this is based on Jessica Cross here in the UK, and her forecast, right or wrong, going out 10 years, shows that the amount of use for food hygiene is this light blue. And you can see the increase here at the top. It's very substantial. And she also has water purification, which again is extremely high. And these are forecast to be like near 100 million ounces by 2020. That is a large increase. Now, on the energy side, governments around the world are pushing green energy. And the two that they're pushing the hardest are solar and wind power. Solar energy will continue. Now, I just have to be honest, and I'm not a huge solar fan, actually. There are applications of solar that are the most efficient, but having an engineering background before I went on to economics and finance, which is my passion, I'll tell you, what you really want is energy flux density. What you want is the most power per cubic whatever. You want the most power you can get per unit input that you can possibly achieve, and the best way to get that's nuclear, like it or not. Solar doesn't do it. It's very inefficient. Regardless of that, a fact is a fact, and the fact is that governments are pushing solar quite heavily. China is doubling the amount of solar panels they're producing annually, and that's continuing. Jessica forecasts that it's going to ramp up extremely quickly by about 2014, and then it's pretty much going to level off, running at around 130 million ounces annually, just for solar. So using the food water purification alone, it's 100 million ounces. Solar application, 130 million ounces. That's an increase of 230 million ounces. And assuming no increase, none, in consumer electronics, electrical power distribution, maglev trains, textiles, or anything else, and the power distribution, the superconductivity story is far from over. When I made my trip to China and met with CITIC Metals and some of the upper banking echelon, one of the main concerns they had was, one, not to waste anything. They're very interested in recycling of silver. And the second and probably main topic of discussion was superconductivity, because it is without a doubt the most efficient way to move electrical power. Nothing conducts electricity better than silver. Nothing reflects light better than silver. Nothing conducts heat better than silver. Investment demand. Now, Jessica didn't go into this at all, and that's okay. This is the transparent holdings that I have to keep changing every couple of weeks almost because it keeps increasing, and that's okay with me as a silver investor. This is basically all of your major ETFs, holding companies, and warehouses. And I distinguish them differently for different reasons. But if you look at the Zurich Continental Bank, the COMEX, the TOCOM, Gold Money, Sprott, all of the major bullion vault, all the holding companies, and you add them all up, you come up with this number, roughly 700 million ounces of silver. Now, every ounce of silver that I've accounted for there is in the public domain. So everyone can check my work. There's no magic up here. Now, we also learned at the beginning of the lecture that DVD I showed, there was how much silver available above ground. Anybody remember? It's 500 to 700 million ounces. So what have I just shown you? That every commercial bar, every 1,000-ounce bar that's out there for commercial use for industry is being held right now for investment purposes only. That's what I'm showing you. I'm saying that right now, standing here before you, that the silver market has never been this tight in the history of mankind. That's what I'm telling you. So all that commercial silver, it's being held. It's being held as investment. So where's the industrial silver coming from? So recyclers better get busy, I'm telling you. Okay, here's the depositories. Again, this is just to back up what I just said. It's 726 million ounces. You can go through them here. And this is going back just a couple of months. And it's at 680. Now, what's interesting here is if you look at the SLV, what you find is that they were at 328, and they're at 340 here, okay? So 12 million ounces. And if you go back a few months before that, the delta, the change was around 30 million ounces. And what I want to point out here, for those that aren't silver bugs, is that I was asked to come talk to Sprott Asset Management during the implementation of their physical silver trust. And I sat down with Eric and some of his team and explained what I just showed you, basically how tight the silver market was and what kind of difficulty might ensue getting a measly 20 million ounces of silver. And in fact, I don't mind sharing with you, I told him that I felt that if he put $1 billion into the silver market and demanded delivery of 30 days, maybe 60, giving them the benefit of the doubt, that would probably cause a fair increase in the price of metal. I was that confident that the silver supply was as tight as I've just illustrated. Well, it turns out that it did take some time for Sprott to acquire that 20 million ounces of silver, and also the price of silver did go up rather substantially during that time frame. But what I'm more interested in pointing out, especially to my friends in the hedge fund community, is that the SLV didn't seem to have any trouble whatsoever getting an additional 30 million ounces. You never heard a peep out of them having any difficulty. And there's reasons for that, which I don't have time to elaborate on. So the investment demand from 2006, now I want to be very clear here that really the investment demand for silver didn't start to accelerate until the advent of the SLV. So I don't want to be bad-mouthing it on one hand and being favorable to it on the other. Overall, generally, I'm favorable to the SLV, and the reason being is that it brings awareness to silver as an investment. It's not my primary silver investment, but if you're a hedge fund manager, you look at it as a secondary way to invest in silver because it's easy to trade. I don't have a huge problem with that. My problem is if you consider it to be your primary silver investment, it is not. I'll go on record saying that. So what's happened from the advent of the SLV and these other ETFs that have tagged along is we've gone up about 300 million ounces in 4 years. That's a 14% compounded growth rate. But it ended in 2010, and it started to level off. It started to accelerate here recently. It's not growing, as I said, in 2010 at that rate, but if we just assume conservatively 100 million ounces being investment demand per year over the next decade, that's extremely conservative. I mean, it is so conservative. The bottom line is, even with that assumption, the bottom line is a mining increase of 20 to 30 million ounces, I explained earlier, per year. The investment demand is 3 times greater. So what I'm really saying is simply this. Without any investment demand, zero, just industrial demand alone, the increase in mining that I explained, you can't keep up with it. Something's got to give. If you add on a conservative amount of investment demand on top of the industrial demand, something's really got to give, because those two factors, supply can't keep up with it. And remember, I assume that supply would compound at a rate that I think it cannot do. So you want to know the punchline, right? The bottom line is, I'm more bullish on silver the next decade than I was in the previous decade. That's the bottom line. I don't think that silver's really got a ways to go over the next decade. It's more favorable dynamics than gold. And I always get joked, a few jokes pushed at me about it being the poor man's gold and all that. And I always like to hit back kind of hard because, you always hear about silver being undervalued and all the things that you hear, and that only the really smart people buy gold. But that's funny because it's the billionaires that bought silver at the right time. Mr. Buffett, his friend Mr. Gates, George Soros, and a few of my friends here in Europe bought silver along with the billionaires at the right time, by the way. So where are we now? We're on an inflation-adjusted place. It's still low. Are we in a bubble? No. No, we're not in a bubble. A bubble, by my definition, is a 10-bagger. In other words, a 10-fold increase. These dots over here, and this is a bit confusing, that's silver and that's gold. We're up about 400% on gold and silver when this chart was made not very long ago. You look at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you're up in here. You're looking at the 1980 bubble, you're up in here. You want to go to the South Sea Island bubble, it's up here. I mean, we are not in a bubble. The bubble, as many of my colleagues has explained, isn't gold and silver. Gold and silver 1-ounce coins or bars or whatever you want to think of have the same mass always and everywhere throughout the entire universe. They don't change. So what is the bubble? The bubble is the fiat currency system. That's the bubble. This conundrum is the biggest one in financial history, and it will go into the record books. So I had to throw this in for Ned. That's our ultimate indicator. People have asked me again and again, when do I know, when do I know, when do I know? Remember, they want to know the exact price, the exact date, and the exact time. So I came up with this. When the Queen is serving burgers at McDonald's, that's the top, okay? Thank you.